Hi, I'm Alex, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down and how I built it back up again. I'm 29, a graphic designer for a small agency. My job might not seem glamorous, but it's stable, and I love the creative challenges it brings. I used to live with my parents, Karen and Mike, and my younger sister, Emma. We shared a tiny, run-down house that always smelled faintly of damp and mildew. It wasn't great, but it was home. At least I thought it was. I wasn't just a guest in that house. I was a contributor. I covered a hefty chunk of the bills, bought groceries, and even handled most of the maintenance whenever something broke. I thought my efforts counted for something. But no matter how much I helped, Karen constantly criticized me. "When are you going to get a real job, Alex?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with disdain. It was her go-to line. Apparently, being a designer wasn't real enough. In her eyes, because I wasn't a doctor or lawyer, my work didn't count. Anytime I tried defending myself, she'd cut me down with, "If it were a real job, you'd have your own place by now." And then there was Emma. At 28, she had perfected the art of doing nothing while still acting superior. She had this smug attitude, fueled by her social media popularity, as if that made her better than me. Meanwhile, I was the one cleaning up after her messes, literally and figuratively. Despite all this, I was cautiously optimistic as my 30th birthday approached. Foolish, I know. I'd even saved up to buy myself a fancy cake from this boutique bakery I'd been eyeing for months. I imagined a small celebration, just the four of us, nothing extravagant but meaningful. It had been years since anyone in my family had made me feel seen, but I held on to hope. A few days before, I decided to bring it up. "Hey," I said during dinner, "I was thinking maybe we could do something for my birthday this weekend. Just hang out, have some cake." Karen didn't even look up from her magazine. "We'll see," she said flatly. I felt a pang of disappointment, but shrugged it off. Maybe she was distracted. Surely they'd come through for me this time. After all, it was a milestone birthday. The morning of my birthday, I went to work feeling good. My coworkers greeted me with smiles, and my inbox was flooded with cheerful birthday messages. It felt nice, like I mattered, at least somewhere. I treated myself to a new shirt during my lunch break, already picturing wearing it that evening while we shared my carefully chosen cake. That feeling lasted until I pulled into the driveway. The moment I saw my belongings, my clothes, books, and personal things strewn across the lawn, my heart plummeted. Boxes and bags sat haphazardly on the damp grass, looking like they'd been thrown out with no care. For a second, I thought I must have misread the situation. Then I spotted them. Karen, Mike, and Emma standing on the porch like judges at an execution. My stomach churned. "What's going on?" I called out, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. Karen stepped forward, arms crossed, her expression colder than I'd ever seen it. "It's time for you to move out," she said curtly. "You're not welcome here anymore." I froze, unable to process her words. "Move out? On my birthday?" I managed to choke out, my voice cracking despite myself. Mike looked away, his hands buried in his pockets. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. As for Emma, she wore a satisfied smirk that made me want to scream. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Emma, ever the picture of compassion, rolled her eyes. "Maybe you should have thought about that before freeloading for so long." Freeloading? The word hit me like a slap. I had been the one holding that house together, financially, emotionally, and physically. I glanced at Karen, silently begging her to explain, to say this was some horrible misunderstanding. "It wasn't enough," she said, her tone devoid of empathy. "We need the space, and you need to grow up." The finality in her voice left no room for argument. Tears pricked my eyes, but I swallowed them back. "Can I at least pack my things properly?" I asked. "They're already packed," Karen replied, gesturing to the chaotic mess on the lawn. I wanted to yell, to demand how they could be so heartless, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I bit my tongue, grabbed the nearest box, and started loading my car. By the time I had stuffed the last of my things into the trunk, my hands were trembling. I turned back toward the porch one final time, desperate for some sign of regret, some indication they cared. "Why today?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why on my birthday?" Karen's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. Consider it our gift to you. Independence. That was the last straw. I climbed into my car and drove off, tears streaming down my face. On what should have been a celebration of my life, I found myself parked outside a dingy motel, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings, trying to piece together what had just happened. That night, as I stared at the cracked ceiling of the motel room, I made myself a promise. I would never let them have power over me again. They'd thrown me out like trash, but I was going to prove to them and myself that I didn't need them. I was going to build a life on my own terms, no matter what it took. Waking up in that grimy motel the morning after my birthday felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. It wasn't just the stiff mattress or the stale air. It was the overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. My family, the people who were supposed to have my back, had kicked me out without a shred of remorse. And now I had to figure out what came next. After a quick shower in the questionably clean bathroom, I got dressed and went to work. My boss, Jenna, had always been sharp, almost annoyingly so, and I knew she'd pick up on something being off. Still, I didn't want to wallow in self-pity. If nothing else, I had my job to anchor me. I couldn't afford to fall apart. By lunchtime, I'd buried myself in emails and design drafts, hoping the rhythm of work would distract me. It didn't. Jenna caught me zoning out and pounced immediately. "Alex," she said, leaning against the edge of my cubicle. "What's going on with you? You look like you haven't slept in days." I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just a rough night, nothing I can't handle." She didn't buy it. Jenna never let things slide. "Take a break and come talk to me," she said before walking toward her office. I hesitated, debating whether to tell her the truth. In the end, it all spilled out. How my family had kicked me out, how I was now living out of a motel, and how I had no idea what to do next. Jenna listened without interrupting, her sharp features softening as I talked. When I finished, she sighed. "Alex, why didn't you tell me sooner? Look, I have a spare room at my place. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and it beats staying at a motel. You can crash there until you get back on your feet." Her offer caught me off guard. "Are you serious?" I asked, half expecting her to change her mind. "Of course," she said, smiling. "I've been in tough spots too. You've been a rock star at work, and I'm not about to let you burn out because of this." Relief washed over me, so overwhelming I almost started crying again. "Thank you," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "Don't worry about that. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself," Jenna said, already shifting back into her usual brisk tone. That night, I packed up my things from the motel and moved into Jenna's guest room. It wasn't much, just a small bed, a desk, and a tiny window, but it was warm and quiet. After weeks of tension and chaos, it felt like a slice of peace. Lying on that bed, staring at the ceiling, I made another promise to myself. I was going to rebuild my life step by step. No more hoping for validation from people who didn't care. No more living in anyone's shadow. This was my chance to start over, and I wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, I threw myself into work with a vengeance. If I was going to move forward, I needed to be laser-focused. Jenna wasn't kidding when she said she'd push me harder. She loaded me up with more challenging projects, and I took them on without complaint. I even started taking on freelance gigs in the evenings. The extra cash would help me save for my own place, and the work kept my mind off my family. Even so, nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, my thoughts drifting back to Karen, Mike, and Emma. Part of me kept hoping they'd call, apologize, or at least try to explain. But the silence was deafening. It was clear. They didn't care, and I had to stop caring too. Thankfully, I wasn't completely alone. My best friend Sam was a lifeline during those dark days. We'd met in college, and though we lived in different cities now, he was just a phone call away. When I told him what happened, his outrage was palpable. "I can't believe they did that to you," he said during one of our late-night calls. "You've been nothing but good to them, and they repay you like this? Screw them, Alex." "Yeah, well, it is what it is," I muttered, trying to sound indifferent. But Sam wasn't buying it. "You know what would really piss them off?" he said, his tone suddenly lighter. "You becoming wildly successful and rubbing it in their faces." I laughed for the first time in days. That's not why I'm doing this. Sure, Sam teased. But admit it, it's a nice bonus. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my rhythm again. My freelance gigs picked up, and I began building a solid portfolio. Jenna noticed my dedication and rewarded it with more responsibilities at work. The late nights and sleepless weekends were brutal, but I reminded myself it was all for a purpose. Slowly but surely, I was clawing my way out of the hole my family had thrown me into. One day, Jenna called me into her office. Her face lit up with a grin as she handed me a folder. "Congratulations, Alex," she said. "You're our new lead designer." My jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "You've earned it. But don't get too comfortable. This means more responsibility." I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally in control of my life again. This was my moment. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. With the raise and steady freelance income, I started looking for my own apartment. It wasn't just about having my own space, it was about reclaiming my independence. For so long, I'd been trapped, first by my family's expectations, then by their betrayal. Now, I was free, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Just when I thought I'd left my past behind, a call from an all-too-familiar number would throw everything into chaos again. Life was finally starting to make sense again. Between my promotion to lead designer, the steady flow of freelance gigs, and my growing savings account, I was on the verge of getting my own place. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my future. But life has a way of pulling you back just when you think you're free. It was a random Wednesday afternoon, and I was deep into designing a campaign for a big client. My phone buzzed, dragging me out of my flow. I glanced at the screen and froze. The name glaring back at me made my stomach twist. Emma. I hadn't heard from my sister or my parents since they'd thrown me out on my birthday. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. With a deep breath, I picked up. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound neutral. "Alex," she said, her voice unusually soft. "It's me." "I know who it is," I replied, already feeling the anger bubbling up. "What do you want?" There was a long pause on the other end, so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she sighed. I need help." Those 3 words threw me. Emma, the same sister who smirked while my stuff was thrown out on the lawn, was asking me for help. My grip tightened on the phone. "Help? After everything that happened? You made it pretty clear I'm not part of the family anymore." "It's not like that," she said quickly, her voice tinged with desperation. "It's about Mom and Dad. They're struggling. Dad lost his job, and Mom, well, you know how she is with money." I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding. "So, let me get this straight. You're calling me because you need money?" "It's not just money," she snapped. "We're in a bad spot, Alex. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said coldly. "You're only reaching out because you need something. Not because you care. Not because you're sorry. Alex, come on. We're family," she said, her tone pleading now. "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't throw you out on your birthday. Family doesn't treat you like trash. You want my help now? Where were you when I needed yours?" She didn't have an answer. The silence spoke volumes. I could feel the weight of everything I'd been holding in, the anger, the hurt, rising to the surface. But I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. "I'm done," I said firmly. "Figure it out yourselves. Don't call me again." Before she could respond, I hung up. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down on my desk. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me felt relief. I'd stood my ground. But another part of me, the part that still craved their approval, ached. That night, the conversation replayed in my head like a broken record. I kept thinking about what I could have said differently, what I should have said. But the truth was, it didn't matter. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I couldn't let myself get dragged back into their mess. They'd shown me who they were, and I wasn't going to forget it. Still, it wasn't easy to shake the guilt. No matter how much they'd hurt me, they were still my family, and some part of me hated the idea of completely cutting them off. I kept my focus on work, pouring every ounce of energy into my projects. The distraction helped, but the lingering ache of that call stayed with me. Sam noticed something was off during one of our weekly calls. "Alex, you're awfully quiet. What's going on?" I hesitated, then told him about Emma's call. As I expected, his reaction was immediate and fiery. "They have some nerve," he said, practically shouting. "After everything they did to you, and now they think they can just waltz back into your life because they're in trouble? Unbelievable." "Yeah," I muttered, "but it still sucks. I don't know. Maybe I should have heard her out." "Don't even go there," Sam said firmly. "You've done more than enough for them. They threw you out, Alex, on your birthday. You don't owe them a damn thing." He was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make it any easier. I spent the next few weeks throwing myself into work and trying to push my family out of my mind. Then, just as I started to feel like I was moving on, they showed up at my doorstep. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I was sketching ideas for a new campaign, completely in the zone, when the doorbell rang. Figuring it was a package, I didn't think much of it. But when I checked the security camera, my stomach dropped. Karen, Mike, and Emma were standing on my porch. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What were they doing here? They hadn't reached out since Emma's call, and now they were showing up unannounced? I debated pretending I wasn't home, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to hide. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Karen brushed past me like she owned the place, her eyes scanning the apartment. "Well, you've certainly done well for yourself," she said with a tight smile. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike shuffled in behind her, his hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. Emma trailed behind, looking uncomfortable. "We need to talk," Karen said, turning to face me. "It's about living arrangements." I blinked, confused. "What?" Mike finally spoke, his voice low. "We think it's time for the family to come back together. You have this nice place, and we could all live here, as a family." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Then I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You're joking, right? After everything that's happened, you think you can just move in here?" Karen's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold glare. "Don't be dramatic, Alex. That's all in the past." "All in the past?" I snapped. "You threw me out. You left me homeless on my birthday, and now you want to move in like nothing happened?" "We gave you the push you needed," Karen said, her voice sharp. "Look at you now. You should be thanking us." I stared at her, stunned. The audacity was beyond anything I could have imagined. They weren't here to apologize or make amends. They were here to take advantage of me. Again. "No," I said firmly. "You're not moving in. Not now. Not ever." Karen's face twisted with anger. "After everything we've done for you..." "Done for me?" I cut her off. "You mean throwing me out? Treating me like I was nothing? I don't owe you anything. Get out!" They argued, but I didn't budge. Finally, they left, Karen muttering threats about legal action as she stomped out. I closed the door behind them, my hands shaking but my resolve stronger than ever. I'd made it this far without them, and I wasn't about to let them drag me down again. After slamming the door on my family, I leaned against it, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. My hands were trembling, and a mix of anger and relief churned in my chest. They were gone, for now, but the weight of their visit lingered like a storm cloud. Their audacity was almost laughable. They had thrown me out on my birthday, left me to fend for myself, and now they expected me to hand over the life I'd built on my own. The gall of Karen trying to spin their betrayal into some kind of favor was infuriating. "You should be thanking us," her words echoed in my mind, each syllable sharp and cutting. Thanking them? For what? Turning my world upside down? I knew this wasn't over. Karen's parting shot about legal action stuck with me. As much as I wanted to believe it was just an empty threat, I'd learned the hard way not to underestimate her. The next day, I called Sam. He didn't pick up right away, so I left a brief, tense voicemail. "Hey, it's me. They showed up. Call me when you can." He called back within the hour, his voice tight with concern. "What happened?" I filled him in on everything: the unexpected visit, their absurd demands, and Karen's parting threat. By the time I finished, Sam was fuming. "They've lost their minds," he said. Do you think they'd actually try something? I don't know, I admitted, but I wouldn't put it past them. All right, he said, his tone shifting to lawyer mode. Here's what we're going to do. First, you need to document everything, every conversation, every interaction. If they call, text, or show up again, record it. Second, we should consider filing for a restraining order. It'll send a clear message that you're not playing around. A restraining order. The thought felt extreme, but I couldn't deny the sense of security it would bring. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. Over the next few days, Sam guided me through the process. We gathered evidence, screenshots of texts, voicemails, and my notes from the times they'd contacted me. It was exhausting reliving everything, but I knew it was necessary. Meanwhile, comma, I tried to keep my focus on work, but the tension weighed on me. Jenna noticed my distracted state and pulled me aside one afternoon. Alex, she said gently, you've been off lately. Is everything all right? For a moment, I debated brushing her off, but then I decided to be honest. Jenna had been there for me when no one else was, and she deserved the truth. My family, I said, sighing. They're causing problems. They showed up at my apartment the other day, trying to guilt me into letting them move in, and now they're threatening legal action. Jenna's expression darkened. Are you serious? After everything they've put you through? Yeah, I said, running a hand through my hair. Sam's helping me file a restraining order, but it's a lot. She nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. Good. You need to protect yourself, Alex. And if you need time off or anything, just say the word. Thanks, I said, grateful for her support. But I think keeping busy is the best thing for me right now. Jenna smiled. Well, in that case, I've got a new project for you. Something big. Think you're up for it? I nodded, eager for the distraction. Absolutely. As Sam worked on the restraining order, I started noticing something strange. Mutual acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years, began reaching out. At first, their messages seemed casual, but soon it became clear they'd been fed a one-sided story. Alex, I heard about your parents, one message read. I can't believe you're just leaving them to struggle like that. Another said, family's family, you should help them out. Each message left me seething. Karen and Mike were spinning the narrative, painting me as the ungrateful child who'd abandoned them in their time of need. It was infuriating and insulting. I called Sam again, venting my frustration. They're spreading lies about me now. I can't believe this. Of course they are, he said calmly. They're desperate, but don't engage. That's exactly what they want. Some kind of reaction they can twist into more drama. Let's stick to the plan. The restraining order will make it clear where you stand. It was easier said than done. My instinct was to set the record straight, to tell everyone the truth about what my family had done to me. But I trusted Sam's advice. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, and I wasn't about to play into Karen's hands. The day the restraining order was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Sam and I sat in his office, going over the details, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. They can't come near you now, Sam said, handing me a copy of the order. And if they try anything, we'll deal with it. Thanks, Sam, I said, genuinely relieved. I don't know what I'd do without you, he grinned. You'd figure it out, but I'm glad you don't have to. As the legal dust settled, another bombshell dropped. Sam had done some digging into my parents' finances, and the news wasn't good, for them at least. They're in deep trouble, Alex, he said during a call. It's not just the job loss and overspending. There's a history of unpaid taxes, debt, and some sketchy financial moves. The IRS is on their tail. The revelation left me stunned. Suddenly, Karen and Mike's desperation made perfect sense. They weren't just struggling, they were drowning, and they saw me as their lifeline. But I wasn't going to let them pull me under. That night, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had betrayed me. They'd thrown me out, tried to manipulate me, and now they were trying to drag me into their mess. But I wasn't that scared, desperate person anymore. I'd built a new life, a better life, without them, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Truly free. The weeks following the restraining order felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped underwater for too long. For the first time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next storm to hit. My apartment became more than just a place to sleep. It was my sanctuary, a space where I could finally feel safe. Work continued to thrive. Jenna's big project turned into one of the most successful campaigns the agency had ever run, and I'd never been prouder of my work. Clients were requesting me by name, and my freelance gigs were bringing in more money than I'd ever imagined. For once, everything was falling into place. But just when I thought the chaos was behind me, life threw one last curveball. It was a quiet Friday evening, and I was unwinding after a long week, curled up on the couch with a book. The doorbell rang, shattering the peace. My stomach tightened as I approached the door. I checked the security camera, half expecting to see Karen or Mike trying to break the restraining order. Instead, I saw a man in a crisp suit holding a folder. Confused but curious, I opened the door. "Alex Murphy?" he asked, glancing at a clipboard. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm with the IRS," he said, handing me a card. "I'm here regarding your parents, Karen and Mike Murphy." My heart sank. What does this have to do with me? "Don't worry," he said quickly, sensing my alarm. "You're not in trouble, but your parents' financial records indicate a history of questionable activity, and we need to confirm whether you have any involvement." I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Even now, they were dragging me into their mess. "I have nothing to do with their finances," I said firmly. "They cut me off months ago." The agent nodded. "Understood, but we'll need a formal statement. If you have any records of communication or financial dealings, it would help clarify your position." I agreed, though frustration churned inside me. After the agent left, I sat on the couch, gripping my phone tightly. They were dragging me into their disaster yet again. But this time, I wouldn't let them. The next morning, I called Sam. He listened as I recounted the agent's visit, his voice calm but firm. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperate people do desperate things. Don't worry, I'll help you put together everything you need." Over the next few days, we compiled every scrap of evidence that showed I had no connection to their financial chaos. The restraining order worked in my favor. It proved I had intentionally distanced myself from them. By the time we submitted my statement, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Whatever mess they'd made, it was theirs to deal with, not mine. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing more about the IRS investigation. Sam assured me it was a good sign. Still, the ordeal left a lingering bitterness. Even as their world crumbled, Karen and Mike had tried to pull me down with them. Then, one day, I got a call from Sam. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. "What's going on?" I asked, bracing myself. "They're being prosecuted," he said bluntly. "Tax fraud, falsifying financial documents, the works. It's serious, Alex. They might face jail time." The news hit me like a tidal wave. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Vindication? Sadness? Despite everything, they were still my parents. Hearing that they might go to prison wasn't exactly a victory. "You okay?" Sam asked after a long silence. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's just a lot." "I get it," he said. "But remember, this isn't on you. They made their choices. You've done everything right." He was right, but it still felt heavy. That night, I thought about everything. The good, the bad, the unbearable. Karen and Mike had put me through hell, but they'd also taught me a harsh truth. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who show up for you when it matters. As the legal proceedings against my parents unfolded, I found myself letting go of the anger I'd held onto for so long. I couldn't change what they'd done, but I could control how I moved forward. Slowly, the bitterness faded, replaced by a sense of peace. One sunny afternoon, I stood in the middle of my apartment, taking it all in. The framed art on the walls, the cozy furniture I'd picked out, the plants thriving in the sunlight, it was all mine. I'd built this life from scratch with no help from anyone, and it was beautiful. That evening, I invited Sam and Jenna over to celebrate. As we laughed and shared stories over takeout, I realized something profound. I wasn't alone. I had people who cared about me, who supported me, who saw my worth. That was my real family. Before the night ended, I made one final promise to myself. I would keep moving forward, keep building, and never let anyone, not even my own family, tear me down again. For the first time in my life, I felt free. And it was the best feeling in the world. Story 2. Gold Digger is the title of this tale. To support her lifestyle, Mom embezzled all of my education funds. She is now pleading because I did this. Hello, everyone. To continue providing you with the greatest material, we spend a great deal of time and energy locating these stories. It would mean the world to me if you click the subscribe button. If you like what I do, your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. Hey, read it for some context, says the original poster. At the age of 19, I continue to live at home with my mother while attending college. It's not exactly a dream setting, but given the high cost of school, it made financial sense. In addition, even if it doesn't always work both ways in my family, I've always been something of a family-first person. Here's the thing, then. I have no money. Similar to working 2 stints at a diner just to make ends meet. Sort of took a break in between classes. I work really hard at my job most of the time in order to save money for books, tuition, and maybe even a transfer to a better school the following year. My dream is to attend an out-of-state university, distant from where I am now, and study business administration. Despite being 50 years old, my mother spends most of her time daydreaming about her next major move. She has great ideas that seem to be on the horizon, but to be honest, she has never actually followed through on any of them. She has tried selling handcrafted jewelry, flipping furniture, and even running an MLM over the past 5 years, to give you an idea. The boss babe kind, indeed. She has always dismissed it as if it were no big thing, even though it has always ended badly. Now I realize that may sound harsh, but I assure you that I have been helpful, perhaps more than I ought to be. I quote, V helped her create Etsy accounts, given her motivational speeches, and even taken pictures of her products for social media. The issue is that none of her plans ever seem to work out. She is excellent at getting things going, but she loses interest as soon as the novelty wears off. And when everything breaks down, guess who's left to pick up the pieces? I would be that person. I quote, V always helped out around the house, despite my meager income. I cover utilities, groceries, and even sporadic expenses like Wi-Fi or my mother's incessant Amazon purchases. Although that's not ideal, I reasoned that it would only last until I could transfer and leave this place permanently. In any case, my mother sat me down for one of her serious conversations a few months ago. She claimed to have a fantastic idea for a boutique that she wanted to launch. She was ecstatic, talking endlessly about how this would be her big break and how she would finally be able to change our lives. I thought, okay, cool, at first. I'm happy she's driven. Then she revealed the truth. She asked me to contribute to the cost. Let me clarify now. I don't have $7,000 laying around. I've been working non-stop since high school, which is the only reason I even have that much saved. I have set aside every single penny for my goal of changing schools. This money is for my future, not just for savings. My mother, however, didn't think so. She advised me to view this as an investment in her future, and that family supports family. She assured me that I would receive a 10-fold return on my investment as soon as the business took off. I told her I had to give it some thought. On the one hand, I felt obligated to assist her because she is my mother. However, I was aware of her past behavior. Why would this time be any different than the others when she'd never followed through on anything? I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept doing the math in my mind to see if I could afford to take this chance. The guilt was eating away at me, but I couldn't. If you don't do what my mom wants, she's really skilled at making you feel like a bad person. She sobbed, claiming that I was being self-centered for not believing in her and that this was her final opportunity to succeed. I finally gave up after 2 days of relentless pressure. I took the cash out of my savings account and gave it to her. She was ecstatic, embracing me and referring to me as her hero. I briefly considered the possibility that this might work. Perhaps she will disprove me. I was mistaken, boy. Okay, so let me take a step back and provide some context so you can truly grasp the dynamics at play. My relationship with my mother has always been complex. It was only the two of us growing up. When I was a baby, my father departed. She has therefore been my mother and caregiver throughout my entire life. She did a lot of work when I was a child, to her credit. Even though we never had much, she managed to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads by working 2 or 3 jobs at once. My mother pursued a number of dreams over the years. An MLM stint, a candle manufacturing company, or even a YouTube channel. She always got off to a great start, but soon lost interest, leaving nothing but debt and justifications. I had learned not to get too involved in her projects by the time I graduated from high school. She never stuck with anything, so it was difficult to take her seriously. Even though I wanted to support her, even though she made poor decisions, I felt obligated to support her because she is my mother. In the meantime, I was attempting to make sense of my own life. Since I had to be, I've always been fairly independent. As soon as I was old enough, I began working, balancing part-time jobs and school to save money for college. My strategy was straightforward. Put in a lot of effort, earn good grades, and then transfer to a better school where I could truly succeed. It was intended to be a short-term arrangement to live at home. I figured it would save me money while I knocked out my general education classes, and then I'd be out of there. But the reality of living with my mom was a lot more draining than I expected. For one thing, she treated me like her personal assistant. Need groceries? I'd better pick them up after work. House needs cleaning. That's on me too. And don't even get me started on the bills. Even though I was technically a dependent, I was paying for way more than my fair share. At first, I didn't mind too much. I mean, I lived there, so it seemed fair to help out, But as time went on, it became clear that my mom was relying on me way more than she should have been. She wasn't working anymore. So everything from the water bill to the Wi-Fi fell on me. And it wasn't just about money. Emotionally, I felt like I was carrying the weight of her dreams too. Every time one of her projects failed, she'd come to me crying about how life wasn't fair and how she just needed one lucky break. I quote, always try to cheer her up, even when I was exhausted from work or stressed about school. But despite all of that, I still believed in my mom. I wanted to believe that she could make something of herself if she just found the right opportunity. So when she came to me with her boutique idea, I thought, maybe this is it, Maybe this time will be different. But it wasn't. So a few weeks after I handed over the $7,000, my mom went into full entrepreneur mode, or at least that's what she wanted me to believe. She was constantly talking about her boutique, how it was going to be this chic, one-of-a-kind online store that catered to busy moms who want to look fabulous without breaking the bank. She had a Pinterest board filled with outfit ideas, color palettes, and inspirational quotes like, "Dream big" or "Go home." At first, I'll admit I was cautiously optimistic. She seemed more focused than she had with her other projects. She talked about finding suppliers, building a website, and even renting a storage unit to keep inventory. It sounded promising, but then the cracks started to show. The first red flag was when she decided to buy a business laptop. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the need for tools to run a business. But instead of getting something practical, she dropped $2,000 on a top-of-the-line MacBook with all the bells and whistles. When I questioned if that was necessary, she waved me off, saying, "You've got to spend money to make money." The next thing I noticed was the constant flow of Amazon packages. Every day there was something new. Clothing samples, fancy hangers, packaging materials with her logo on them, even a $300 label maker. Our tiny living room started to look like a warehouse. I asked her how much she'd spent so far, and she brushed me off with, "It's all part of the investment." I started to worry when I realized she hadn't actually done anything to set up the business itself. There was no website, no official business registration, no marketing plan, just a pile of random stuff she'd bought. Whenever I asked her about it, she'd get defensive and say, "I'm working on it, okay? These things take time." The breaking point came when I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, She was talking about how she was planning to use some of the money I'd given her to treat herself, for all the hard work she'd been doing. She mentioned booking a spa day and buying a new purse. I confronted her that same night. I told her I was worried that she wasn't using the money the way she'd promised, and that I needed to see some kind of progress. Her reaction? She laughed. She actually laughed in my face and said, "You're acting like I owe you something. Relax, I've got it under control." That was when I realized she didn't see this as a loan at all. To her, It was free money. My money that she could use however she wanted. Things escalated quickly after that. I started keeping a closer eye on what she was doing, and the more I saw, the angrier I got. She wasn't working on the boutique at all. Most days, she'd sit on the couch scrolling through Instagram or binge-watching some random show on Netflix. If I tried to bring up the business, she'd snap at me claiming I was stressing her out and that Rome wasn't built in a day. I tried to be calm, but it was impossible. This was my savings and my future that she was blowing on. Nonsense. I reminded her over and over that she'd pledged to pay me back, but she always had some excuse. I just need a bit more time. She'd say, once things get rolling, you'll get every penny back. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was the way she made me feel like I was the terrible guy for even bringing it up. She'd say things like, you don't understand how hard it is to start a business, or if you can't trust your own mother, who can you trust? One day I found out she had lied about something quite serious. She informed me she'd set up a meeting with a potential supplier, but when I inquired how it went, she got all cagey. I did some investigation and learned she'd never even contacted the provider. Instead, she'd spent the day at a manicure salon. That's when I lost my temper. I made it clear to her that I wanted my money returned. No more justifications, no more postponements. I required the funds to be returned to my account, and now I needed it. How did she respond? Total drama. She broke down in tears and accused me of being cold-hearted and self-centered for not encouraging her desire. For everything she had done for me over the years, including raising me as a single mother, she accused me of being unappreciative. We never agreed on it being alone in the first place, she said, pulling the ultimate gaslight. She then uttered the words that made all the difference. It was a present. What I was hearing was unbelievable. I told her straight out that we didn't agree on this. She simply shrugged her eyes and stated, "You're too young to understand how life works." When I reminded her of the numerous times she had promised to reimburse me, when I understood I couldn't reason with her. My money was not going to be returned by her. It was because she didn't want to, not because she couldn't. Nothing I said would change the fact that she now perceived it as her money. I felt totally defeated for a few days. I had put a lot of effort into saving that money, and now it was gone, as simple as that. I made an effort to concentrate on my work and studies, but it was difficult to avoid feeling resentful. Whenever I saw her, she was sitting on the couch, doing nothing to clean up the mess she had made. Then I had a revelation. This was something I no longer had to tolerate. My mom's is followed by a gift statement in the weeks that follow. Emotionally, I reached my lowest point. I wasn't only angry, I was devastated. There was more to that money than just keeping it in a jar. It was the culmination of many years of arduous labor. Every holiday, every late-night shift. I skipped work to put in more hours. I always declined to hang out with friends because I wanted to save money for the future. It was all in vain. But the money wasn't the only thing that was betrayed. It was my mother's blatant insolence in acting as though this was commonplace, as if my desire to reclaim what was rightfully mine made me the villain. To make matters worse, she continued as though nothing had occurred, using stock photos of boutique items and captions like "dreaming big things." She continued to share updates about her entrepreneurial journey on Facebook. Watch this space for my upcoming chapter. There was no chapter in the interim. The boutique wasn't there. Not even an attempt was made. She put on a front to make herself look good while she drained me of all my energy, and it was all smoke and mirrors. I tried to focus on school, but I couldn't shake the anger. Every time I sat down to study, my mind wandered back to that $7,000. I couldn't stop imagining all the things I could have done with it, moving out, finally transferring to my dream school, or even just giving myself a tiny break from working 50 hours a week. Instead, I was stuck living paycheck to paycheck while my mom treated herself to spa days and takeout. The worst part? She didn't even feel bad. She walked around the house like she was some kind of visionary, talking about how success is right around the corner. Meanwhile, the bills were piling up. I'd overhear her on the phone with her friends, laughing about how she was manifesting abundance while I was struggling to scrape together enough money to pay for textbooks. The resentment started to eat away at me. It wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about making her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. I wanted her to realize how much she'd screwed me over, and I wanted her to suffer for it. But revenge wasn't as simple as just confronting her again. She'd previously showed me that she didn't take me seriously. Every time I brought up the money, she'd ignore me or change the narrative to make herself the victim. If I wanted to get even, I needed to be wiser. The first thing I did was take a good look at my money. I knew that as long as I was living under her roof, I was trapped. She'd keep taking advantage of me, and I'd keep letting her because I felt obligated to help. I needed to move out, but moving out wasn't inexpensive, and I didn't have much left in money. After she grabbed the $7,000, so I started working even harder. I picked up extra shifts at my part-time job, staying late every night and working doubles on weekends. It was exhausting, but I didn't have an option. Every dime I earned went straight into a secret account that I formed without telling her. At home, I played along like nothing had changed. I didn't want her to suspect that I was preparing my escape whenever she brought up her boutique. I'd nod and grin, appearing to be sympathetic even though it made me sick to my stomach. After a few months of saving, I was able to pay the first 2 months' rent and a security deposit for a small apartment close to college. All that mattered was that it was mine, even though it wasn't much. One of the most bizarre nights of my life was the night I moved out. I used the chance to pack up everything I owned because my parents had gone out to dinner with some friends. It took very little time. Other than a laptop, a few personal belongings, and some clothes, I didn't own anything. I left her a note before I went. I made it brief and direct. For a period. Mom. Because you think family members owe each other nothing, I'm seriously considering that. I will no longer be assisting with the bills as I am moving out. Please don't get in touch with me until you are prepared to reimburse me the $7,000 that you owe me. I hope you have success with your business. Until then. Your self-centered daughter. Without turning around, I walked out the door after taping the message to the refrigerator. It felt fantastic at first. At last, I was free. Free from the overwhelming burden of cohabitating with someone who obviously didn't value me, free from her guilt trips, and free from her justifications. Despite being modest and a touch dilapidated, my new flat felt like a castle in comparison to the emotional prison I had just left. But I was struck hard by the fact that I had to live alone. Pay the rent, utilities, groceries. It quickly added up. I had to take out a student loan to pay for my classes because my full-time employment hardly covered the necessities. On certain nights, I would eat instant noodles in my small apartment and question whether I had made a mistake. My mom was blowing up my phone in the meantime. She pretended nothing had happened at first, texting me about unrelated topics like, "What do you want for dinner?" Or, "Is it possible for you to get milk on your way home?" The texts became passive-aggressive when I didn't reply. "It appears that you are too busy to speak with your mother." Then, at last, the guilt trip began. "I gave up a lot for you. And you pay me back like this?" I disregarded all of the messages. She wasn't worth my time if she wasn't prepared to reimburse me. Ignoring her, however, did not alleviate the anguish. I still had the feeling that I had lost a piece of who I was. As if she had stolen more than my cash, my confidence in family, my trust, and my conviction that she would ever genuinely care for me as much as I cared for her, had all been stolen by her. I came to the conclusion that getting even wasn't sufficient at that point. I wanted more than for her to feel sorry. I wanted her to suffer. One night, in the silence of my flat, I had the idea for my retaliation. I gazed at my table's pile of past due invoices. Whether it was in terms of money, emotions, or anything else, my mom had always relied on me to support her. She viewed me as her safety net, someone she could exploit without fear of repercussions. But what if I did away with that safety net completely? I was aware of her frailty. She relied on outward looks. In her universe, my mother was preoccupied with how others perceived her. She was the unselfish, industrious single mother who gave her everything for her unappreciative daughter. What if I reveal the truth, though? What if I showed her true self to everyone in her life? The one who defrauded her own child of $7,000, the manipulator, the liar. I began modestly. I started by getting in touch with the few friends she still had, the people she boasted about her store to all the time. I stated in passing that I had moved out because my mother had embezzled my education funds while pretending to start a business and then refused to reimburse me. I did not exaggerate or embellish. I simply spoke the truth. The responses came right away. In fact, I received an apology from one of her acquaintances, whom I had known since I was a child. She pledged to confront my mom about it, claiming she was unaware that she had done it. Another buddy completely stopped answering her calls. It was trivial, yes, but it was satisfying to pierce the flawless picture. My mother made a lot of effort to keep up. I then looked things up online. My mom was active on Facebook, sharing updates about her progress, inspirational sayings, photos of her work at Progress Boutique, books, and stacks of trash she had purchased. So I wrote my own post. Although I didn't mention her by name, it was easy to know who I was referring to. I presented the facts for a period. In order to move schools, my mother had stolen $7,000 from my hard-earned earnings, which I had been saving for years. She then claimed that it was a gift, even though she had previously stated that it was a loan and that she would repay me. She had used the money to finance her personal indulgences rather than attempting to launch her business. I used this period to wrap up the post. For now, I've broken off contact and moved out. I'm refusing to let her continue to take advantage of me, not because I don't love her. Families are meant to help one another, not take advantage of one another. Before it's too late, I hope she realizes it. The post went viral. People offered encouragement by sharing it, leaving comments, and even sending me a private message. Some of my mom's personal acquaintances contacted me to express their surprise and disappointment. Most strangers who spoke to me said they had experienced similar things and urged me to persevere. Within hours, my mother viewed the post. She yelled at me over the phone, saying that I had damaged her reputation and embarrassed her. She warned I would regret it and that I was ruining the family. But for the first time, I was unaffected by what she said. She no longer frightened me, and that was only the start. I chose to hit my mom where it hurt because I knew she was having financial difficulties without my assistance with the expenses. Do you recall all the packages she had been ordering from Amazon? The ones she had secretly applied for a credit card in my name? Yes. When I looked at my credit record, I discovered those. I was angry at first, however, I later recognized that I could take use of it. I made a police report and declared the charges to be false. In addition, I reported my mother's unauthorized use of my credit card to the card company and froze my credit. The consequences were severe. In addition to canceling her account, the card company sent her a note requesting that she pay the remaining sum of more than $4,000. There was no escaping it. Despite her best efforts to brush it off as a misunderstanding, she had to repay every dime after her credit score plummeted. My mother was desperate by now. Her idea of opening a boutique was doomed. Her finances were in ruins and her friends were avoiding her. She began phoning me every day and leaving voicemails that varied from heartfelt regrets to furious tirades about how I had destroyed her life. I didn't answer any calls, but one day she unexpectedly arrived at my apartment. She appeared rough, as if she hadn't had any sleep in days. All she wanted to do was talk, so she pleaded with me to let her in. She was crying as I answered the door against my better judgment, but this time, I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. The 2-hour conversation that ensued was equal parts apology and justification. Although she acknowledged her mistake, she maintained that she had only accepted the money because she believed it would improve our lives. She sobbed, claiming she didn't know how to make things right and that she missed me. I nearly felt sorry for her for a second. Nearly. However, I then recalled all of the restless nights, anxiety, and outright betrayal I had experienced as a result of her behavior. I was honest with her, telling her that I no longer trusted her and that she should pay me back first if she truly wanted to make things right. Everything. No justifications. There are no delays. I couldn't have her in my life until then. Even though she said she would, I wasn't waiting for her. Even while it might not solve every problem, getting revenge felt fantastic. Reddit, I appreciate your patience with me during this. I'm simply trying to move on for the time being, but I'll let you know if anything changes. Update. Reddit, hello! Since so many of you messaged and left comments on my initial post, I wanted to offer you all an update. I want to start by saying thank you for all of your help, counsel, and sometimes tough love. During a rather bleak period, it truly helped me see things clearly. This is the current situation, for a period. I received a call from an unidentified number approximately a week ago. Normally, I wouldn't respond to those, but for some reason, I did. My mother was calling from jail, as it turned out. Apparently, without my assistance paying the bills when I moved out, her financial condition deteriorated. She went behind on almost everything, including electricity and rent. To make things worse, she was unable to make the payments and maxed out many credit cards in an attempt to generate abundance by reading useless trash from Amazon. She made an effort to ignore the debt collectors when they knocked. This is where it gets crazy, though. In a desperate attempt to improve her circumstances, my mother participated in a dubious scam to make quick money. I don't know every detail, but based on what I've learned, some sort of identity theft and bogus checks were involved. In summary, she was apprehended and is currently being charged with several significant offenses. Crying and pleading for my assistance. She called me from prison. She claimed to require bail funds, specifically $10,000, and that I was the only person she could rely on. She continued to talk about how she had learned her lesson, how her time in jail had served as a wake-up call, and how she was prepared to change her ways. I experienced a little twinge of guilt. We're talking about my mom, after all. Then, however, I constantly recalled. She deceived me, exploited my generosity, and violated my confidence. I reflected on the $7,000 she had taken from me, the restless nights, the ongoing anxiety, and the fact that she never once expressed genuine regret for any of it. I inhaled deeply before telling her the truth. I can't help you, Mom, but I hope this serves as a true wake-up call for you. Not now. You have to work this out for yourself, she snapped. She began to yell that I was leaving her and that, as a single mother, she had given up everything for me. She even included some euphoric lyrics on the importance of families sticking together no matter what. But what do you know? I didn't move. I told her calmly that I wasn't in charge of this. I reminded her that she made these decisions and that she must take responsibility for them. Although I wasn't going to save her, I expressed my hope that she would take this time to think things through and emerge a better person. Either literally or metaphorically. I hung up after that. I've been feeling a range of emotions ever since that call. A part of me is guilty. She's still my mother, after all, and I don't want her to go through this. However, I also know that this is exactly what she needs. She avoided responsibility all of her life, and this might be the only way she will ever own up to her mistakes. I have no idea what will happen to my mother. Perhaps she will finally reach her lowest point and change for the better. Or perhaps she will continue to attribute her troubles to everyone else. In either case, I've accepted that I can't save her. She must wish to protect herself. Story 3. My autistic stepsister accused me of writing an essay, but due of her condition, no one believes me. Hello, everyone! Remember to click the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It greatly benefits our channel. Let's begin the video now. Hey guys! This is my first time posting here. The OP begins. To be honest, I have no idea where to begin. I suppose it's simply one of those situations where you believe you understand your family and how things operate, but then something occurs that makes you question if you actually did. To put things in perspective, I am a 27-year-old man. My dad, my stepmother, Sarah, and my 20-year-old stepsister, Rachel, who has autism, have been living with me. Sarah entered the scene a few years after my parents divorced, when I was around 11 years old. I've known her for a long time, and although we've had our disagreements, I never imagined it would get to this point. Rachel is a kind child. I use the word kid because although being 20, she feels much younger. She has certain obsessions, such as board games and crime dramas, and she is quite regimented. Sometimes, even when it doesn't make sense, she will parrot phrases from these episodes while watching them repeatedly. Although she is quite intelligent, she has trouble comprehending non-literal or sarcastic language. You know, it's just the way her mind functions. Sarah asked me to watch Rachel for the night a few weeks ago, while she and my dad went out to dinner. There was no big deal about this. I've seen Rachel quite a few times already. We spent time together and played the game of life, which she is always determined to win. After that, we viewed her preferred detective series. I even prepared mac and cheese and hot dogs for her supper. Her all-time favorite. Everything appeared completely normal. I didn't give it a second thought, and she went to bed content. However, everything changed the following morning. Sarah barged into my room as I was browsing through my phone. She just came in screaming, "What did you do to Rachel?" without knocking or anything. I sat up in utter bewilderment. When I asked her to explain, I had no idea what she was discussing. She said Rachel had told her I'd touched her. My stomach dropped. I couldn't even process what she was saying at first. Touched her. "What are you talking about?" I asked. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. Sarah just kept going, saying Rachel would never lie about something like this, and that I needed to confess. Confess to what, though? Nothing happened. We played a game, watched TV, and then she went to bed. That was it. But Sarah wasn't listening. She stormed out, yelling that the family needed to deal with this. The next thing I knew, Sarah had called a family meeting. My dad, Sarah, me, and even a couple of my cousins and uncles were crammed into the living room. The tension was thick, like you could feel it in the air. Sarah sat there with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I was some kind of monster. My dad looked confused but supportive. He kept saying, "Let's hear him out." But Sarah wasn't having it. "Rachel told me everything," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "She said he touched her, and he's just sitting there pretending like nothing happened." I tried to explain, but every time I opened my mouth, Sarah would cut me off. Why would Rachel lie about this? She kept saying she doesn't even know how to lie. I looked at my dad, desperate for him to back me up, and he did, but it didn't make much of a difference. I know my son. He said he's not capable of something like this. But Sarah was adamant. She said Rachel was upset and confused when she came to her that morning, and that she'd never seen her like that before. I tried to tell them that Rachel gets confused easily, that maybe she misunderstood something, but it was like talking to a brick wall. By the end of the meeting, Sarah had made up her mind. She told everyone I wasn't allowed to be around Rachel anymore, and if I didn't like it, I could leave. My dad looked helpless, and my cousins wouldn't even make eye contact with me. It felt like I was being exiled from my own family for something I didn't do. That night, I sat in my room replaying everything in my head. Had I done something that Rachel misunderstood? Was there a moment where I'd accidentally scared her or made her uncomfortable? But no matter how much I thought about it, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Nothing happened. I didn't do anything wrong, so why was this happening? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face full of anger and accusation. I kept thinking about Rachel, too. Did she really believe I'd hurt her? Or was this something Sarah had twisted into a bigger deal than it was? I didn't know what to do. The next day, my dad tried to talk to Sarah, but it didn't go well. She was furious that he wasn't taking this seriously. She told him she was going to the police. The days after Sarah's accusation were some of the most stressful of my life. I felt like a stranger in my own house, constantly on edge, wondering what Sarah might do next. It didn't take long to find out. She made good on her promise and went to the police. A few days later, I got a call asking me to come down to the station for questioning. I've never been the kind of person to get into trouble, not even minor stuff. The notion of going to the police station made me feel nauseous, but I didn't have an option. When I arrived, I was brought into a tiny, windowless room. It was only myself, a detective, and my lawyer. The investigator started asking questions, some plain, some that felt like accusations veiled in inquiry. "What's your relationship with Rachel like? Has Rachel ever appeared uncomfortable with you? Do you think Rachel may have misconstrued something you did?" I answered every question as honestly as I could, trying to be cool even though my heart was hammering. I told them about how Rachel and I spent the evening together playing the game of life, watching TV, and then her retiring to bed. Nothing about that night had been out of the usual. The detective appeared indifferent, but that nearly made it worse. He wasn't furious or accusing, he was merely doing his job. But even answering questions like, "Have you ever touched Rachel inappropriately?" felt like a stain on my character. The notion that I even had to protect myself against something so horrific was nearly too much to stomach. The interrogation came to an end after what seemed like hours. I didn't feel any better when my lawyer informed me that I handled it effectively. I felt unclean just by sitting in that room. as if my name was already soiled regardless of anything else. The atmosphere in the house was intolerable when I arrived home. Sarah refused to give me a glance. I could only hear her shouting through the walls when my dad tried to speak to her. After what Rachel said, "How can you just sit there and support him?" she let out a scream. Despite my dad's repeated attempts to reason with her, she was obviously not changing her mind. Rachel, on the other hand, like nothing had occurred. Later that evening, she approached me with a smile and asked if we might play a game. If she had been so furious that she informed Sarah that I had wounded her, her actions totally confused me. Why was she behaving like this? It was illogical. Rachel's passion for crime programs and her habit of quoting dramatic phrases from them came to mind. She has previously stated things like, "I just know it," "He's guilty," or "When you're acting, you can't trust anyone." Is this going to be one of those times? Was there something she watched on TV that she might have repeated? Sarah was serious about it. I attempted to discuss this with Sarah, but she interrupted me before I could say anything further. "It is not your intention to turn things around and give the impression that Rachel is ignorant, she yelled. "She is not a moron." "She wasn't stupid," I said. Never would I say that. Sarah, however, was too irate to pay attention. I didn't mean to point the finger at Rachel. I was only attempting to determine the possible source of this miscommunication. It didn't matter, though. Sarah was already convinced that I was guilty, and there was no way to change her mind. The way the rest of the family began to treat me was the worst. Sarah made certain that everyone was aware of my suspected actions, and I sensed the change even though no one directly told me. My cousin no longer responded to my texts. My uncle and aunt, who often called once a week, stopped talking. When I was walking down the street, I even saw that some of my neighbors were avoiding me. I couldn't believe how fast things had changed. I was a member of a family only a few days ago. The hardest aspect was that I was now the odd one out. I didn't know how to make it better. I had the impression that I was losing the war. My life seemed to be going out of control after the police interrogation. Sarah always cut me off when I attempted to explain myself. And she set an example for the rest of the family. The only person who seemed to believe me was my dad, but even he appeared exhausted from all of the arguments. In an attempt to determine what might have gone wrong, I replayed that night in my mind for a long time. Rachel had appeared to be doing just fine. She joyfully went to bed after laughing during our board game and getting giddy over her favorite TV program. She didn't act in a way that indicated she was angry or afraid. However, Sarah's accusation was unexpected, and my entire world collapsed. I was sitting in my room one night, trying to put everything together. Something came back to me. A few months ago, my dad installed a security camera in the living room to monitor Rachel when no one else was home. It was placed close to the TV, which provided a view of the couch and game table as well as the majority of the living room. I might have the evidence I needed to clear my name if the camera had been recording that evening. The following morning, I spoke with my father about it. "What about the living room security camera? Do you think it captured anything useful?" I asked. My father's eyes grew a little wider. "You might be onto something," he said. He agreed to check the footage while Sarah was out running errands. When we finally pulled up the recordings, I could hardly breathe. My dad and I watched as the footage played back. Every moment of that evening, there we were, sitting at the table, playing the game of life. Rachel was smiling, laughing, and teasing me about losing. After the game, the camera caught us moving to the couch to watch her favorite detective show. The two of us sat there quietly eating snacks while the TV played. Nothing about it seemed unusual. The final clip showed me walking Rachel to her room. She gave me a quick hug at the doorway before disappearing inside. I stood there for a moment, turned off the light, and walked back to the living room. That was it. There was nothing even remotely suspicious on the footage. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "This proves I didn't do anything," I said, looking at my dad. He nodded, his expression serious. "It's solid evidence," he said. "But you know, Sarah's not going to take this well." My dad was right when we showed Sarah the footage later that day. She barely even looked at the screen before dismissing it. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, crossing her arms. "Who knows what happened when the camera wasn't recording?" "That's ridiculous!" my dad shot back. This film captures the entire evening. There's no gap, no potential for anything to happen, Dot. You need to quit blaming him of something he plainly didn't do. But Sarah wouldn't back down. You're just supporting his side because he's your son, she snapped. Rachel told me what occurred, and I believe her. This video doesn't change that. Her reluctance to even evaluate the evidence was infuriating. I wanted to yell at her, but I knew it wouldn't do any good, Dot. She, quote, already made up her mind, and nothing I said or showed her was going to change it. After that, my dad advised taking the tape to the police. They'll have to consider this, he said. It is tangible evidence. I consented, and my attorney assisted us in presenting the video as proof. It took a while, but at last I felt like I had a firm foundation, Dot, notwithstanding the supplied video. At home, life was still intolerable. Sarah stayed away from me completely, almost denying my existence. Rachel, on the other hand, pretended nothing was wrong. As if nothing had occurred, she continued to regurgitate lines from her TV shows and invite me to play games with her. It seemed unreal. I was curious as to what Sarah had said to Rachel to persuade her that something had occurred, Dot. Did she coerce her into accepting it? Or was Rachel only restating what she believed Sarah would find interesting? In any case, Sarah seemed to be in charge of the entire situation, not Rachel. I held on to the notion that the video would be sufficient to cleanse my reputation as the days passed. It proved my innocence beyond a reasonable doubt, however, I felt in my heart that it wouldn't make a difference if the cops did believe me. It would be difficult to repair the harm Sarah had caused to my connections and reputation. I hoped that things would eventually settle down when the cops saw the surveillance tape. However, the atmosphere in the house remained intolerable because Sarah refused to accept the evidence, Dot. The few times she talked to me were brief and brimming with disdain. My father advised me not to let her irritate me and to concentrate on the legal aspect. However, it was difficult to overlook the severity of the situation. As usual, Rachel didn't appear to notice the chaos. I had lost my sense of how to behave around her. Dot, knowing that Sarah was seeing everything I did, made me feel nervous. But I also wanted to maintain things as normal as possible. As the tension reaches a breaking point, they are waiting for another reason to blame me. My dad proposed showing the video to the entire family during a meeting. Others could accept it if Sarah doesn't. I wasn't hopeful, but I acknowledged that I had to protect myself, he added, Dot. And if there was a remote possibility that someone in the family might pay attention. I was forced to accept it. My dad requested that the meeting be held. My parents, Sarah, and several other close relatives were invited. My 2 cousins, aunt, and uncle. They came with an uneasy appearance, obviously not knowing what to believe. The last person to arrive was Sarah, Dot. She entered with her mouth clenched and her arms folded. She wasn't going to make things simple, as I could already tell. I plugged my laptop into the television and began to play the video. I went over each stage while the video showed Rachel and I playing the board game. She's laughing and joyful, as you can see. There's no indication that anything is amiss, I said. I emphasized how serene everything was when the camera cut to us watching TV. We spent the night just like this. Nothing took place. At last, I played the video of Rachel, happy and unconcerned, heading to bed. This covers the entire evening from beginning to end. I turned to the gathering and stated that doubt is not an option. The room remained silent for a while. I think that looks very regular, my aunt responded, clearing her throat. My uncle said something about how compelling the video was, and my cousins gave a little nod. Sarah then raised her voice. This proves nothing, she remarked sharply. What if he altered the video or did anything while the camera was not looking? How can we be certain that this is the entire tale? My father took over. This is absurd, Sarah. You've been making unfounded accusations against him, and now you're disregarding convincing evidence that he did nothing. Sarah retaliated. Naturally, you support him. He is your son. Loyalty has just blinded you. From then, the dispute intensified, with Sarah making more charges and my dad standing up for me. For the most part, my dad said nothing, although once he muttered something about the video looking real. Sarah gave him a glance that made him stop talking right away. I made an effort to maintain my composure, but it was difficult. I've already been found guilty by you. I looked straight at Sarah as I said, I can show you whatever I want, but you will never trust me. She didn't dispute it. I trust Rachel and I don't need a video to tell me what's true, she remarked. Instead, There was no resolution at the end of the meeting. It was obvious that my aunt and uncle didn't want to take sides, but they did say they would consider what they observed. As they walked away, my cousins avoided looking at me and appeared uneasy. I sat on the couch feeling more devastated than ever when Sarah stormed away, taking my dad with her. The sole bright spot was my father. "We'll continue to fight this," he replied, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You are in possession of the truth." Even though I was grateful for his assistance, my family was still broken and my reputation was still in shambles. Some individuals just refused to see the truth, even though it was directly in front of them. It was the surveillance footage that saved my life. When weeks of waiting, I eventually received word that the case had been withdrawn when my lawyer turned it into the police. The video demonstrated that Sarah's claim was unfounded, and the authorities had no justification for taking further action. I was in the clear legally, but it didn't seem like a win. Sarah didn't respond when I informed my family that the matter had been dropped, as I had wanted. She was neither sorry nor relieved. Rather, she intensified her efforts. "Of course they dropped it," she responded in a sarcastic tone. "You're skilled at hiding your identity." Her remarks struck a deeper chord than I had anticipated. Sarah would not abandon her version of events. Despite the overwhelming evidence in my favor, even worse, she persisted in telling her story to everybody who would hear it. I could feel the weight of people's opinions every time I went out. I was shunned by neighbors who used to greet me. The stigma followed me everywhere, even though I tried to concentrate on the fact that I was no longer being investigated. The fact that I had been cleared by the police didn't matter. My reputation had already harmed. Proof was not necessary for people to assume the worst. It was worse than ever at home. Sarah stayed away from me completely. Additionally, the atmosphere was so tight that it felt like a tangible weight was bearing down on me when we finally crossed paths. My father attempted to mediate, but it was obvious that he was worn out. He repeated it to me, I quote, "I'm not sure how long I can continue living this way." Putting him in the middle made me feel bad. However, what option did I have? Rachel kept acting as if nothing had occurred. I couldn't bring myself to join her anymore, but she still begged me to watch TV or play games. None of this was her fault, in my opinion. I couldn't get rid of the unease I felt around her, even if she probably didn't really comprehend what was happening. But what if she said it again? What would happen if Sarah did it again? They split up the remainder of the family. Although they didn't want to get involved, my aunt and uncle said they believed me. My cousins completely shunned me. I didn't blame them for avoiding contact. Sarah was unrelenting in her charges, and I was taking a chance on her anger by supporting me. Things felt different, even at work. I could sense the tension with some of my coworkers, but my employer was kind and told me I didn't need to explain myself. When I came into a room, people I had been close to would stop talking and start avoiding me. My entire life seems to have been marred by the charge. To help me deal with everything, I began going to a therapist. But in the face of such crushing loneliness, even that seemed like a tiny consolation. When so many people have already formed opinions about you, how can you start over? Realizing that there would always be those who believed Sarah, even if I had the truth on my side, was the most difficult aspect. It likely that some of them didn't want to deal with the problem, while others believed I had gotten away with something. I got the feeling that I would always be in the shadow of her accusation, regardless of what I did. I began to consider leaving my family, my career, and my community for the first time in my life. What had transpired seemed like poison to all I had created here. I wasn't sure I could cope with living under continual suspicion if I stayed. At least I would have an opportunity to break free from the stigma that had taken over my life, even if I knew it would be difficult to start over somewhere fresh. I still hadn't decided, but it was getting difficult to resist the thought. Perhaps leaving it all behind was the only way to go on. The last update. I ultimately decided to go after weeks of wanting to stay. It had become intolerable for me to remain in my hometown. It seemed like people continued to view me with mistrust despite the fact that I had ample proof of my innocence. The judgmental looks, avoidance, and whispers served as continual reminders of how widespread Sarah's charges had grown. When I visited a nearby coffee shop one day, it was the last straw. I noticed two women conversing at an adjacent table while I waited for my order. "He is that," they whispered to each other. "Do you know who Sarah was referring to?" The other one gave me a quick glance and they started talking in low voices. I felt awful, until I received my coffee and walked out. I had to remind myself to remain composed. I couldn't continue to live this way. I felt like I had a scarlet letter on my chest as I walked around. The fact that I had surveillance footage demonstrating my innocence and that the lawsuit was dropped didn't matter. People had already made up their minds, and Sarah's insistence on keeping the rumors going made sure they continued. I informed my father I was going that evening. He appeared worn out and depressed, but unsurprised. "I understand," he answered softly. "I'm sorry it has come to this, but you must act in your own best interests. It was unreal to pack up my life." I had very little. Only a few personal belongings and a few of luggage. However, packing things into suitcases felt more laborious than it needed to be. Every object I packed brought back memories of a life I was leaving behind, one that had been destroyed by an unanticipated allegation. I had one final seat with Rachel before I departed. I didn't want to annoy her, and she was unaware that I was leaving. I thus took things easy. I politely told her that I couldn't watch a TV after we played one last round of her favorite board game. Perhaps next time. Even though I knew there wouldn't be another opportunity very soon, I said it. Rachel gave me a big embrace and told me, "You're my favorite," as I was saying goodbye. My heart was broken. She has nothing to do with this. She was not quite aware of what had transpired or the ramifications of Sarah's charges. It was like deserting her when I left her. However, remaining was no longer an option. I didn't bother bidding my father and Sarah farewell. I left a message stating that I was relocating to a new city in order to start again. It wasn't spiteful. This was just more convenient. There was no use arguing with them once more. My dad would never confront Sarah, and she would never say she was sorry or acknowledge her mistakes. I relocated a few hours away to a little city. I could visit my folks if I wanted to, and it wasn't too far. However, it was distant enough that nobody here was aware of my identity or the circumstances. It was more difficult than I thought to start afresh. It was daunting at times to find a new work, make new acquaintances, and get used to a new routine. However, it was also freeing. I was able to enter a store or coffee shop without feeling criticized for the first time in months. I began to concentrate on little accomplishments, landing a new job, making new friends, and discovering fulfilling interests. I gradually began to feel like myself once more. My father frequently phoned to inquire about my well-being. He informed me that tensions remained at home, particularly between him and Sarah. He acknowledged that she hasn't moved on. One evening, but she never will, in my opinion. I could hear the fatigue in his voice, and although I felt sorry for him, I was also relieved that I was no longer in the thick of things. I began rebuilding my life over time. To make new friends, I joined a neighborhood sports league and even began helping out at a shelter. Every stride forward seemed like a tiny win, even if it wasn't easy. One of the most difficult things I've ever done was to break up my relationship with Sarah and my stepsister, but it was the correct thing to do. The truth will never be accepted by certain individuals, regardless of the strength of your proof. It would have ruined me to stay somewhere where I was always being watched. I was able to recover, start again, and concentrate on creating a life free from the falsehoods of others when I left. Rachel is still on my mind. I occasionally question whether she still misses me or if she has moved on as if nothing had occurred. I quote hoping she'll see why I had to go someday. I can only concentrate on the future and do my hardest to get there till then. Although it's not always simple, there are situations when starting anew is your only option.